The Magnet, a Romance, Henry C. Rowland. Chapter 1. The big schooner yacht. Shark lay peacefully at anchor in Shoal Harbour, Maine. At her taffrail, the national yacht ensign aired itself lazily in the land breeze. From fore and main trucks fluttered the pennant of the NY Yacht Club and the burgee of Captain Heldstrom Bell, USN, retired. A solid old seafaring tub was the Shark, built some time back in the 70s, when, no doubt, she had been a tremendous swell. She was square in the jowls, pug-nosed, paunch-bellied, with a stern like a coach horse, and there was a break from her quarter-deck to the waist, and a high to gallant forecastle. Solid timber she was, or at least looked to be, though a gimlet might have shown differently. And what ballast she had was inside her, and not jerking away at the keel in frantic efforts to whip out her spars. For a yacht of her size, the Shark probably carried the smallest crew on record, modern double-action hand winches and other labor-saving devices being installed about her decks. Brightwork there was scarcely any, and that covered with a coat of shellac. Galvanized iron took the place of brass, but if the old schooner lacked the glitter of metal, she certainly shone with spotless cleanliness. One saw at the first glance that the Shark was less of a pleasure craft than a floating home, and such a domicile she had truly been for 15 years. Asthma and an insubordinate heart had retired her owner from the service of his country. The same affliction forbade his residence ashore and compelled him to seek a warm winter climate. Wherefore he wisely bought the Shark for a mere song and made of her a home for himself and his 3 little motherless daughters, Cécile, aged 9, Paula, aged 7, and Hermione, aged 4. That was 15 years before the epoch of this saga, so that we find our 3 sirens at the dangerous ages of from 19 to 24. Little heed had their cantankerous parent ever given them, and little need had they of it, as from the very first day to the present they had found a wise and kindly nurse, playmate, and duenna in that splendid old grizzled Viking, Captain Heldstrom, master mariner. Captain Heldstrom, sailing master of the Shark, had previously served for 10 years in the U.S. Navy and might have had a commission had he wished. Most of his service had been under the choleric Captain Bell, to whom, for some incomprehensible reason, he was devoted. It was, therefore, not unnatural that he should have followed him on his retirement, nor that he should have assumed the care of the little girls, the old Norseman having, like so many big-muscled, big-hearted men, a tremendous fund of paternal instinct. They had their governess, of course, but it was Uncle Chris who really brought them up and tended them when ill and imparted to them much of his own honest, fearless nature. He taught them discipline as well, and all 3 had more than once felt the flat of his big hand where it would do the greatest good. Cécile for impudence, Paula for theft, stealing goodies from the galley, and Hermione for adventuring aloft and swarming out on the jib-boom. This last admonition had been followed by a cuff on the side of the watchman's head, which had sent that grinning tar into the scuppers. Thus one may listen with less surprise to a certain conversation taking place upon the ample quarter-deck of the schooner, she squatting peacefully upon the sparkling waters of Shoal Harbour one golden day early in August. Sprawled amongst the cushions on a transom, basking like a pussy-cat in the sun, was Cécile, a luscious beauty, ripe to the point of falling from the bow, and already petulant for the plucking. For 3 seasons this girl had demoralized the yachting world, for Captain Bell was widely known, and the Shark as hospitable as her namesake. A high-tempered but jovial host, Epicurean of appetite, and ready to immolate his health on the altar of good fellowship at a moment's notice. 3 lovely daughters, one a desperate flirt, one soft and sweet as a West Indian night breeze, the third a long-legged nymph with violet eyes, her pretty mouth full of sailor slang, ready to swim a race around the ship or run one over the truck. My word, it is no wonder that old Heldstrom's hair had visibly whitened in the last 3 years. Cécile was catching it fore and aft upon this August day. "It vas me berought you oop," growled the Norwegian in his beard, "and sometimes I am not prude of it. How many young men have you jilted this summer?" Cécile dropped her chin on her knuckles and kicked up her heels most unmaidenly. I haven't jilted anybody. It's not my fault if they slam off in a rage. I don't ask any odds, and if they can't play the game without bawling, they shouldn't play it at all. Love is not a game. It is a serious business, as someday you may find out to your cost. Cécile gave the nearest cushion a vicious kick, and her head a toss which set the bright hair to shimmering opalescent as a new hooked porgy. Don't fear, she said. When I find the man who can make me feel what I want to feel, he will have no cause to complain. Perhaps you may, Heldstrom retorted. He bent his big brows upon her flushed, resentful face, and his eyes, clear and blue as polar ice, softened a little. I hope not, my dear. Meanwhile, you must not encourage diese oder young men. But how am I to know? Cécile interrupted when Heldstrom raised his hand. You will know. And if you do not know, then it is not the right man. He took a turn or two on the deck, then paused to stare toward the harbour mouth. Up forward, the sailors were clustered about the windlass, talking in low, vehement tones, the murmur of which reached aft. Less noise for'ard there, ordered the captain in his great resonant bass, and the gabble ceased. The hands were all staring toward the entrance, and as he looked forward, Heldstrom gave a little growl in his throat. Dis pilot fish, said he, turning abruptly toward Cécile. Was he another? Another what? She asked, sulkily. Another victim. Another young man you have made crazy. And pull your skirt down by your ankles, my dear. You are now too old to flop around Dot Vey like a little girl. Cécile jerked her supple young body upright. If you are going to do nothing but scold, said she, sulkily, I am going below. She sprang to her feet and stood as primly as was possible for one of her nymph-like allure. I must say, she snapped, and thrust out her chin haughtily, it seems to me that I have reached an age where I might expect to be spared lessons in conduct from the sailing master of my father's yacht. She turned toward the companionway, head in air. Cécile, said Heldstrom sharply, and the little feet stopped as though despite themselves. Well? You will say, excuse me, Captain Heldstrom. I won't. You will say, excuse me, Captain Heldstrom. You will say, excuse me, Captain Heldstrom. Cécile pressed her lips firmly together. Look at me. Slowly, and as if moved by some compelling force, the lovely, rebellious face was turned, and the long, grey eyes, with their double fringe of black lashes, were raised to meet the clear blue ones flashing from under the bushy eyebrows. Cécile's eyes sought the deck. Forgive me, Uncle Chris, she murmured. Dot is a fan better, my dear. Listen, Cécile, I am not a poor man, and I am getting on in years. My brother has left me lands and houses in Norway, and I own in some big ships. But I stay and sail this old junk for your fadder, and draw my pay vitches nodding, and why? Because if I go, who then will take care of my little girls? Your fadder is not rich. Perhaps he is not so rich as me, but you are my family, and all Dot I have is yours, used as I am yours. And so, my little girl, I talk to you like a Dutch uncle, and I am not Dutch, but Norwegian and a gentleman born. Dot is all, my dear. But it was not quite all, for Cécile rushed to the old Viking and flung her young arms about his neck and kissed the first exposed spot she could find on the deep-lined, bearded face. Then she stepped back and surveyed him through misty eyes. When I meet a man like you, said she, and caught her breath, he will find out that I am something more than a flirt. And she turned and fled below. Hardly had she disappeared when the captain's alert, if somewhat blurred, vision was caught by a yacht's dinghy rapidly approaching the shark. Picking up his glasses, he at once discovered, sitting in the stern of the boat, a young man whom he recognized as a Mr. Huntington Wood, and who had been the previous summer one of Cecile's most devoted suitors. When the caprice of the spoiled beauty had sent him eddying in her wake with the other wrecks, Heldstrom had sighed deeply. He had liked and admired Wood, finding him all that a well-bred young American ought to be. Included amongst these virtues was a very large fortune, and Captain Heldstrom had been deeply disappointed that Cécile could not have found it in her heart to care for him. Seeing that Wood was coming to call, Heldstrom sent the steward to inform Cécile, then received the guest himself, there being no one of the family on deck. Wood was a clean-cut, thoroughbred-looking man of about 28. Perhaps his greatest attraction lay in the thoughtful kindliness of expression which was habitual to him. There was humour, also, and the typical American alertness. As Wood and Heldstrom exchanged their greetings, there came from forward a sort of buzz of suppressed excitement. The hands were peering intently into the dazzling reflection of the sun on the water at the harbour mouth. Captain Heldstrom quickly levelled his glass in that direction, then laid it down with a shrug and a shake of the head. "What is it?" Wood asked. "The pilot fish, Zir," answered the sailor. "What do you mean?" Heldstrom was about to reply when Cécile came up through the companion, and Wood went to meet her. She greeted him with a rather quizzical smile. Wood flushed. "You were right," said he. "Here I am back again in less than 6 months." "We have missed you," said Cécile, and led the way aft. "Thank you. I have come back, not as a suitor, but as a friend." "Still bitter?" "Not in the least." "I heard," remarked Cécile with a little laugh, "that you were building a home for sick babies." "That is true. My cure for bitterness, and not a bad thing for the babies. If all of your rejected lovers would only turn to philanthropy for their cure, what a lot of good you would do." "That is a nasty remark." "Sorry. Let's drop personalities. How are you all?" "Papa's asthma is better. He has taken a tremendous fad for cooking and spends most of his time stewing over the galley stove. This seems to be a good thing for him, though bad for us. The cook's wages have had to be raised." Wood laughed. "And the girls?" "Paula is as sweet as ever. Hermione has grown up. She is taller than I and is going to be a beauty." From the hands clustered on the topgallant forecastle, there came at this moment a sort of stifled yelp, immediately followed by some deep-sea admonition from Captain Heldstrom. As if in answer to the commotion, there popped out of the galley, which as in most old-fashioned vessels was in a forward deck-house, a corpulent gentleman with a crimson face, snow-white moustache, and a shining bald head, whereof the lustre was marred by streaks of flour. "Papa!" called Cécile. Captain Bell, for it was he, turned sharply, and seeing Wood, his choleric face lightened. He tore off his apron, wiped his bare, floury arms, and came striding jerkily aft. "Well, well, Huntington. Glad to see you, my boy. Excuse my negligee. Was just at work on an omelette soufflé, but somehow it went wrong. Infernal thing collapsed like a punctured tire. All the fault of this pilot fish." "What is the pilot fish?" asked Wood. "Cécile will tell you while I brush up. You will stop for lunch? Yes, this is not a request. It is an order. I have made a plat that I want your opinion of." He glanced over the rail. "You are off the Arcturus?" "Yes, cruising with Livingston Poole. I leave him tomorrow. His people are to join him at Portland." "Come and visit us a bit." He raised his voice. "Christian, tell that man from Arcturus to go back and say that Mr. Wood is lunching with us." "Yes, Zir." Pausing to search the horizon with his glasses, Captain Bell went below. Wood looked inquiringly at Cécile. "Did you ever hear of a pilot fish?" she asked. "Yes, it is a little fish which is a constant companion of the shark. So this is a companion of yours." "There is a man who lives on a little yawl and goes wherever we go. Last summer we began to notice that no matter where we were, there would turn up sooner or later this same little boat. Sometimes she would be in port when we arrived. No doubt he got our next address at the post office and then passed us en route. The shark is about as speedy as a brick barge, and this yawl is a smart little sailor." "What is the game of this pilot fish?" asked Wood. "It appears that we are his mind. He makes us do his thinking for him. Here comes Papa. Get him to tell you of his interview with the pilot fish." Captain Bell, refreshed inside and out, appeared at this moment in the companionway. His first glance was for the harbour mouth. "Come here, Papa," called Cécile, and tell Huntington about your conversation with the pilot fish. Captain Bell joined the two. The pilot fish, said he, is a balmy galoot in a little yawl who has been eddying around in our wake all summer. When it got certain that his whole business was to trail us, I went alongside him and asked what he meant by such cheek. I found a long, tawny, sleepy-eyed scoundrel drinking tea and munching macaroons. "Good day," says he. "Won't you come aboard? You are just in time for tea." "Thanks," said I. "But I didn't come for tea. I came to ask why in thunder you hang under my fin like a bloomin' pilot fish." He sets down his teacup and turns a pair of yellow eyes on me. "Do you mind?" he asks. "I don't want to intrude." "That depends on what you do it for," I answered. "Well then," says he, rumpling up his hair, which is about a foot long and the colour of coir rope, "I follow you because it saves me the trouble of deciding where I want to go." "The deuce you do," said I, too surprised to say more. "Do you mind?" he asks again. "I don't know that I mind," said I, "but you make me tired. Can't you do your own thinking?" "It's so distracting," says he, and heaves a sigh. "You see, Captain Bell, I am a poet, and if I have to determine where I want to go, it breaks into the muse." And Bell went off into a fit of wheezy laughter, which finished in a coughing spell. "Now what do you think of that?" he gasped. "It sounds fishy to me," Wood observed. Bell nodded. "Still," said he, "there may be something in it, after all. I give you my word, I come near flying off my chump sometimes trying to decide where to go next. The girls will never help me out. But to go back to this balm—" "Just the same," I said, "it must be deuced inconvenient sometimes to follow me through all kinds of weather in that little thing." Says he, "That's good moral discipline. If it weren't for that, I'd lie in one place and rot. You'd see the pond lilies sprouting from my spars. For instance," says he, "coming up here I got started too late to catch the tide and was dodging rocks in the fog all night long. That is an excellent way for a poet to refresh his faculties," says he. "Of my own initiative it would never happen, but I put myself under a moral obligation to go wherever and whenever you do." Bell gave a plethoric chuckle. "Well," said I, "at any rate, you must know your business. It was thick as pea soup," says he, waving his fin. "I can usually find my way around." And he took a swig of tea. Upon my word, I began to like him. He has only one man, a half-baked fin with a cleft palate and one eye swung over to port. A warlock, if ever you saw one. The pilot fish told me that he found the beggar starving on the beach. Nobody would ship him. He was that rum. These two zanies scarcely ever speak. The fin lives up forward and only comes aft to handle the boat and valet him. He was ironing his shirt on the forehatch while we talked. I asked him to dinner, and you'd have thought from his face that I'd suggested our having a glass of potassium cyanide together. "Oh, no, no, no," says he, taking a grip of his yellow thatch. Said I, "What's the matter? I'm not planning to poison you." He began to spatter out apologies, said that once he had met my household, he would not feel at liberty to tag me around, and asked me once more if I was sure that I did not object. "Follow me to Hades, if you like," said I. "The sea is free to all, and you never get within half a mile anyway." My word, he was so upset he broke his teacup against the combing, and I left him trying to swig his tea out of nothing and biting the china ring around his finger. Coming off that evening, we passed the fin. "Kennebunkport, Kennebunkport, Kennebunkport, Kennebunkpo, Rut," he was pattering to himself. You see, he'd been ashore to find out our forwarding address. When we reached Kennebunkport, sure enough, here was this floating bug house lying at anchor, and the pilot fish refreshing himself with tea and macaroons. As we rounded up, his narrative was interrupted by a commotion forward. The men were talking and gesticulating. Out of the galley bounced the cook, a pair of battered glasses in his hand. Up through the pantry hatch popped the steward like a rabbit coming out of his hole, and the girl's maid, a matronly woman, followed him. "Look at that," growled Bell in disgust. "You'd think the White Squadron was coming in." He levelled his glasses at the swimming glare. "Confound him. It's he, and Cécile gets into me for $10. Down below, a cabin clock rang sharply. 2 bells. 2 bells, sir, said a quartermaster. Make it so, snapped Bell, for the shark's routine was strictly naval. 2 bells were struck forward, to be followed by a smothered chorus of exultation from the winners of sundry bets. "Silence there!" cried Bell, and added to Wood, "This ship has got to be no more than a blooming grandstand. That lobster has lost me $10. He must have stopped to fish." Captain Heldstrom started forward, smiling under his grizzled beard. "Win, Captain," snapped Bell. $5, from the cook, Zier, answered the captain. "I'm glad it was the cook," muttered Bell. "This pilot fish," observed Wood, "has got the races beaten to a finish." All eyes aboard the Shark were directed over the starboard bow. Out of the vivid glare appeared presently a small, chunky vessel, yawl-rigged, though from the size of her mizzen she might have been classed as a ketch. No bunting did she fling to the light, offshore breeze, no pennant, burgee, ensign, nor even so much as a telltale at her truck. Huntington, a yachtsman of some experience, doubted that she had been designed and built for a yacht. Beating back and forth across the bay, the yawl finally made her berth about halfway between the Shark and the eastern side of the harbour. "What is her name?" asked Wood. "Her name," Bell answered, "goes with the tea and macaroons. It is Daffodil." "Oh, fudge." "His name," said Cécile, "is Harold Applebo." She had expected to hear a feeble cry for help, but was disappointed. Wood sprang up from his lounging position. "Harold Applebo," he cried. "Why, he was a classmate of mine. I might have known, from your father's description." Cécile opened wide her grey eyes. "Tell us about him," said she. "Harold Applebo," Wood began, "is eccentric and a poet. At college, however, he was not considered by any means a fool." "Does he write good verse?" asked Cécile. "One needs to get into the bathtub to read it. Yet, although mushy, he has a few admirers and has published 2 books, doubtless at his own expense. Selections from the first were read to me this summer by a friend. When she had finished, my head felt like a bottle full of bees. There was one, Ode to a Dewdrop in the Heart of a Pansy. Another was called Flowers at Play." "Nuff, nuff. Let me up," murmured Bell. "I managed to keep my strength," continued Wood, "until my friend, who happened to be a young mother, recited from memory, 'Baby in the Asphodel.' That finished me. I have never felt the same toward babies since. That is unfortunate, considering my charity." He levelled a glass toward the yawl. "Yes, I see Harold, and there is a thing like a gollywog getting into the dink." "The fin," said Cécile. "Tell us some more about Applebo." "At college he kept house with a parrot and a bullpup, and was known to have eccentric ideas. He did not believe in friendship, saying that one's attitude should be the same toward all of one's fellows. Although known to be tremendously powerful physically, nothing would induce him to enter athletics. He said that the demonstration of individual prowess was a vain exhibition of superiority, and therefore not ethical. It was observed that his arguments were beautifully adapted to his own taste." "Sounds rather an interesting ass," said Bell. "Why not jump into the dinghy and see if you can't get him for lunch? He might come for you." Wood glanced at Cécile, who nodded. "Do," said she. "Tell him that he may let us do his thinking for him, just the same." "Very well," answered Wood, always obliging. Captain Bell raised his fat, throaty voice. "Away, dinghy!" he called to the quartermaster on duty. Chapter 2. While Captain Bell, Cécile, and Huntington Wood were idly discussing the manoeuvres of the pilot fish, and different members of the crew were engaged in settling their bets, there was one person aboard the schooner who was taking measures to put an end to the peculiar devotion of Mr. Harold Applebo, poet. In her roomy cabin below, Miss Hermione Bell had heard the exclamations which announced the sighting of the pilot fish. The porthole over her bunk commanded a view of the harbour mouth, and resting on brackets overhead was a big, battered, old-fashioned telescope. Hermione threw down her book, reached up for the glass, and took a dead rest on the brass rim of the porthole, when the Daffodil sprang to meet her vision, swimming unsteadily in the vivid reflection of the sun. Once the yawl was clear of the glare, Hermione was able to examine her in detail. The first object to catch her eye was a figure squatting in a toad-like way up forward, and which, even as she looked, scrambled upright, as though in obedience to an order, and began to clear the anchor. Hermione observed that the man's body was disproportionately wide for its height, that his head resembled a deck swab, and that the legs were very bowed. "The fin," she muttered. "What a brute! He looks like a sea spider." Passing from the fin, she tried to distinguish the figure at the wheel, but all that was visible above the high coaming was a mop of reddish-yellow hair and one big, bare shoulder. As though conscious that he were under scrutiny, Applebo kept his face persistently turned away, and Hermione had learned by experience that when he was presently forced to go about, he would shift himself to the other side of the cockpit, keeping his back to the shark. The wheel of the yawl was placed very low and almost hidden by the high coaming. "Hang him!" Hermione burst out, and closed the telescope with a vicious snap. For several minutes she sat on the edge of her bunk, lost in thought, her head tilted slightly forward and her eyes unfocused. One graceful leg hung straight down, the other was tucked under her, schoolgirl fashion. Her kimono, open at the throat, showed that splendid arching bust seen most frequently in singers. Hermione was not a singer, but she was a strong swimmer, and the lung development is similar. Her neck was straight and strong, the little nuque a detail for sculptors to dream of, carrying its subtle curve to hide in the thick, black, lustrous hair. Hermione's type was Celtic. Irish and French would both have claimed her, the latter for an Auvergnat, because of her very deep violet eyes and the little nose with the retroussé tip, which all three of the girls had from their mother. Hermione was taller than her sisters, and was destined to be a big woman at maturity, this promise being so far draped in youth. Europeans found Hermione far more beautiful than Cécile, and Paula lovelier than either. But to the American taste, the girl's type was too tropical, even her indigo eyes commonly passing for black. There was also about her a tempestuosity which appalled most people. Hermione was not a hoyden, she was far too feminine for that, but she was temperamentally impetuous, often to the point of violence, and her discourse, when angered, was not always what it should be. Captain Heldstrom worshipped the planks she trod on, and she had given him more trouble than both of the others put together. Which is to say that she gave him more trouble than did Cécile, as Paula was always good. Hermione had already many beaux, whom she treated like dogs, yet her method was kinder than Cécile's, for Hermione never flirted. If she liked a man, she permitted him to row and sail and swim with her. If she did not like him, she told him to clear out. For gallantry she had no patience, and was apt to receive with contumely the most subtle of flatteries. And yet, Hermione's long, round arm reached for the lid of a little locker beside her bunk. Therefrom she took a large package of cream, or rather, corn-coloured notepaper closely covered by a small, regular handwriting, which at the first glance resembled Greek script. From this package Hermione selected a sheet at random, then flinging herself face downward on the bunk, dropped her pretty chin into one hand, and resting on her elbow, she proceeded to acquire the following interesting information. To Hermione. The fog may blanket the sleeping sea. Hermione's sunbeams may falter, moonbeams pale, may swoon at the frown of the darkling gale. I follow thee, Hermione. The skies may weep or the tempest shrill. Hermione, tide rips may growl and the rock fangs yawn, and sea traps be set in the lightless dawn. I follow still, Hermione. I may not see thee nor hear thy voice, Hermione. Nothing I ask but to feel thou art there, to share thy ocean, to breathe thy air. So I rejoice, Hermione. Thus, if I sing one little song, Hermione, 'tis the cry of the gulls swept off on the wind, one soundless sigh of a love that is blind. Forgive my wrong, Hermione. Hermione read the verses twice through, then stared at the white bulkhead. Fool, was her polite comment. There were a great many of these poems, each bearing a different date, and each a souvenir of some port where the shark had visited. Over a period of 3 months ran the verses, and not once during that time had the poet been within a quarter of a mile of her to Hermione's knowledge. Once or twice she had caught a glimpse of Applebo's face through her telescope, but never a satisfactory one. Paula was the only one of the girls who had ever seen him at close range. She had come on him face to face in the post office, but had been quite unable to say whether or not he was good to look at. The verses always came most prosaically through the mail. All three of the sisters had a large correspondence, so that Hermione's corn-coloured letters, with their peculiar calligraphy, had excited no especial comment. Once or twice she had been asked from whom they were. "A darn fool," Hermione had answered, for which her father, old sinner that he was, saw fit to reprove her. Hermione lay on her bunk and kicked up her heels and read her verses, sometimes with a curling lip when the sentiment impressed her as particularly mushy. Yet, oddly enough, there was a flush glowing darkly through the olive of her cheeks, and anyone would have sworn that her eyes were a very velvety tone of black. Once or twice her long, lithe young body squirmed uneasily, and her broad forehead clouded as though from displeasure. Certainly, there was, aside from the presumption of the poet in sending her the verses at all, nothing to give offence in Applebo's effusions. All were of the very essence of delicacy, and each carried somewhere in its text a little word of apology. Hermione rose suddenly, flung the leaflets back into the locker, and sat for a moment with brooding eyes and the warm flush burning through her clear olive skin. The girl never burned, nor tanned, nor chapped. Her complexion preserved invariably its delicacy of tint and texture. "What a lot of rot," muttered Hermione to herself. "The man's an idiot. If I make him feel like that, why doesn't he come over and kick about it, instead of flopping around in that little tub and writing me fathoms of slush? Here's where he gets a little sonnet from his Hermione." With her flush even darker, she reached for her writing block and penned the following epistle. "Schooner-yacht Shark, Shoal Harbour, August 4th. Harold Applebo, Esquire, Yacht Daffodil. Dear Sir, has it ever occurred to you that it is scarcely fair to my sisters, Cécile and Paula, that I, the youngest, should be the sole recipient of so many poetic gems? Inasmuch as your acquaintance with them is precisely that of our own, my sense of fairness no longer permits of my being the only favoured one. I must therefore request that you transfer your delicate attentions for the next few weeks at least. This measure will also give me an opportunity to recover from the emotions produced by your latest, Hermione's eyes, which, by the way, do not happen to be grey as the sleeping sea. Thanking you for your delicate attentions, and in the hope that my sisters may appreciate them even more than my limited poetic faculty has permitted, very truly yours, Hermione Bell." "There," said Hermione. "If that doesn't send the sentimental youth flapping out to sea, I'll give him something that will." She sealed and addressed the letter and proceeded to dress, putting on a white serge sailor blouse and skirt, the latter short enough to clear her trim ankles. The thick black hair she wound in snug bands about her head, added a crimson ribbon, and capped the whole with a white tam. Thus costumed, she appeared a tall, slenderly graceful girl with a pretty, tantalizing face, of which one carried away an impression of warm, vivid coloring, sapphire eyes, tip-tilted nose, and red lips ever ready to return insults for the kisses which would seem to fit them. Hermione always looked slender to the point of being thin when smartly dressed. It needed her bathing suit or a riding habit to reveal her as the Diana which she was. Whether for good or ill, the mother had left a rich legacy of physical beauty to her three girls. As Hermione went on deck, she saw Wood pulling away in the dinghy in the direction of the Daffodil. He had declined the offer of a man to row him, and had promised to do his best to bring Applebo back for luncheon. "Where is Huntington going?" asked Hermione of Cécile. "I thought he was to stay for lunch." "So he is. We sent him over to see if he couldn't induce the pilot fish to come too. It seems they were classmates at Yale." "Applebo won't come," said Hermione. "Why not?" asked her father. It would strip him of his sentimental pose to be formally presented. I'm going ashore to post a letter. The quartermaster brought her own little cedar skiff alongside, and Hermione got aboard and pulled in for the landing of the reading room. Arrived, the boatman took charge of the skiff, and Hermione started to walk up the steep path which led through the scrub pines and was a shortcut to the village. She had gone about half the distance when she saw, waddling rapidly toward her and resembling in the thicket some gnome or troll, a short, squat figure which she recognized immediately as the Finn. Hermione had several times seen the man at close range, the last of these occasions being while he was propelled to the landing in a wheelbarrow, insensible with drink, and suggesting some great pulpy kraken or other fetid creature of the deep. It had taken the girl a couple of days to get over the effect produced by the sight of the sodden, inert body, bloated purple face with its shock of wild black hair, and the misshapen limbs dangling and flopping grotesquely over the sides of the barrow. Now, as she saw him approaching, Hermione felt a strong impulse to turn and bolt. Even at the distance of 100 yards she could distinguish the pallid face which the sun seemed powerless to tan. As she drew closer, she observed, with a shudder, the wide cleft in the upper lip, and the eyes set so painfully askew that the man was forced to turn his head almost at right angles to his shoulders in order to look at an object in front of him. Pride kept Hermione straight on her course. Then, as the Finn drew near, it occurred to her to give her note to him. This would obviate furnishing information to a possibly curious and inquisitive postmistress, for both the Shark and the Daffodil had spent a good deal of the summer at Shoal Harbour, where the striking personality of Applebo must have attracted a certain amount of attention. Therefore, as the Finn drew abreast of her, Hermione made a sign with her hand, his head still cocked sideways and somewhat curiously suggesting that of a seabird hunting its food in the spray, the man waddled up. Hermione, watching him half in disgust, half in curiosity, received a surprise. For the face of the Finn, distorted as it was, held, nevertheless, a sort of wild and spiritual beauty. Whether this was because of an expression of infinite pathos and suffering, or owing to the beautifully shaped forehead and deep, velvety brown of the eyes, Hermione could not have said, but suddenly all of her repulsion vanished, leaving only kindliness and pity. The expression in the great melting brown eyes, twisted as they were, suggested that which one might see in the eyes of a faithful Newfoundland, his back broken by a motor car. Hermione held out her letter. The Finn took it with a smile, then bowed. "For your master," said Hermione. The Finn smiled and nodded. "Yo, leady," said he. Hermione, thinking to tip him, opened her purse. To her surprise, the man sprang back, while an expression, almost of fright, filled the misshapen face. "Nah, nah, nah," he mumbled. Hermione noticed that while he held up one big, gnarled hand, as if in protest, he was nevertheless drawing nearer, and that in a stealthy, sidelong way. Startled, she snapped shut her pocketbook. "What's the matter?" she asked sharply. The Finn's face fell. He drew the back of his hand across his forehead. Hermione saw that it was beaded with perspiration. The Finn looked at her with a tragic sort of smile, pointed to the purse, then made a motion as of one drinking deeply. Hermione understood. "You are afraid that if I give you some change, you may drink?" she asked. The Finn nodded vigorously, stood for a moment regarding her, then, with a tug at his forelock, turned on his heel and scuttled off down the slope toward the landing. Chapter 3. Close aboard the Daffodil, Wood was about to lift his voice in a hail when there came to his ears the sounds of one declaiming in a rich and resonant bass. Having observed the departure of the Finn some half-hour earlier, Wood decided that Mr. Applebo must be refreshing his solitude by the recital of some of his own verse. It was therefore with no more consciousness of eavesdropping than has one who pauses to listen to the practising of a musician that Wood rested on his oars, to be startled by the following interrogation. "Tell me, beloved, since your eyes hold all the azure of the skies, why, then, when night their brightness mars, Those lustrous depths hold all the stars. But when the day's once more begun, I look, and lo, there shines the sun. And when it sets, alack too soon, in each deep orb I find the moon. The answer is, Hermione, all heavens in those eyes for me. Before Wood could sufficiently recover from the astonishment produced by this innocent query and its answer, the same voice continued in prose, apparently in criticism of the effort, and as follows. Shucks! How do I know her eyes are azure? I never saw them. They might be cadmium or cobalt or madder lake, for all me. A pause, then. When night their brightness mars. Mars. Oh, hell, what does it mar it with? A handful of mud. Another pause, then. Mars is rotten. Let's see. Mars. Cars. Spars. Tars. Chars. Bars. Oh, what the deuce. Oh, let it go. It's no worse than the rest. In each deep orb. Fudge. I wonder how many thousand millions of bum poets have said that. Oh, damn it. Damn it. Damn it. There came the sound of paper violently torn. Wood, smothering his laughter at this unofficial peep into the soul of the poet, raised his voice. Aboard the Daffodil. There was no answer. Wood tried again. Aboard the Daffodilly. I say, Harold, ... Followed an instant of silence, then a tawny, leonine head was pushed up through the hatch. Hello, Harold, said Wood. The poet blinked a pair of clear, amber-coloured eyes. His mane of ruddy yellow hair was tousled, and his expression was that of a person surprised in a yawn. Hello, Huntington, he drawled, in a very deep and husky bass. The yellow eyes blinked once or twice at the dinghy. You're off the Shark? Just so, Mr. Pilotfish. May I come aboard? Pray do. I am in the act of brewing tea. Sorry I haven't anything more robust to offer you. I cannot keep spirits, as my crew is a Finn with second sight and an alcoholic affinity. He can spot a whiskey bottle through a teak locker, then he forces the lock and drinks all that there is without reference to the next man. If there were a gallon, he would drink it all. And then what? Asked Wood. Then I chain him to the mainmast so that he will not start to swim back to Finland. However, my tea is very good. So are the macaroons, after you scrape off the green mould. The weather has been warm and humid, and I cannot get fresh ones here. I have wired to Boston for a supply. But come aboard. He reached over the side for the painter of the dinghy and caught a clove hitch one-handedly and with a deftness which did not suggest the amateur. Huntington stepped aboard and looked about with interest. A handy little boat, he said. Yes. She was designed for a Block Island swordfisher. I bought her on the stocks before they had touched her inside. These boats' plans are all got out by yacht designers. She is not dull. No motor? Number. They smell, and the grease would soil my manuscripts. Besides, the beat of the engine would get in my head and spoil my meter. Think of trying to write dactylic hexameter with an accursed motor pounding away. Juba, this. Juba, that. Come below. Our tannin is distilled. In the cosy cabin, singular for its extreme bareness and singular yellow colour scheme, Wood seated himself upon the edge of the bunk and watched the poet as he poured the tea. Mr. Applebo was in his customary service rig of faded yellow rowing shirt, white duck trousers, and leather sandals. His long, wavy hair, naturally of a reddish yellow, was sun-bleached to the lustreless tone of oakum and hung in heavy clusters that almost hid his ears. The lithe, beautifully muscled figure was flawless so far as one could see. Big-boned, brawny, deep-chested, yet with a suggestion of lightness and grace which one associates with statues of Hermes. His skin, wherever visible, was of the quality of satin, the colour of old gold, and his hands, while hardened from physical work and the handling of wet ropes, were exquisitely shaped, the fingers straight and strong and well spaced. Most striking of all was the poet's face, and it was here that one paused in doubt before rendering a verdict upon Mr. Applebo's physical attractiveness. In feature and expression there seemed to be no standard with which to compare the man's singular type. or at least no human standard. Many faces find their caricatures in the lower animals. One sees people who resemble, or at least suggest the sheep, monkey, bulldog, camel, etc. Applebo's face suggested a sleepy lion. There was the same tawny color scheme, the blinking amber eyes focused on some far-distant point, the straight, broad nose with a mouth which was slightly lifted in the middle, cheeks cut away and showing a prominent molar bone. Certainly, the general resemblance was rather toward the cat carnivora than toward anything human. So far as expression went, Wood could discover absolutely nothing. There was about the poet an atmosphere of languor, either real or assumed, and one felt that if this sloth could be torn aside, the true man or animal beneath might stand revealed. "What do you do on this boat?" asked Wood. "I dream dreams, and laugh at them. I weave long and fascinating romances, of which I am the glorious hero, and laugh at them. Also, I write many winged words, and laugh at them. Number other people do that." "I have been sent over here," said Wood, "to order you to report for luncheon aboard the Shark. They are getting tired of you as merely a parlor game." Applebo looked a little scared. "Thanks awfully," he said, less dreamily, "but I cannot go. My delicate sense of social ethics prevents—" "Rot. Really?" "My extreme sensitiveness. You can't tag strangers about until they ask you to luncheon, nor, having been so weak as to yield to the temptation and accept, could you continue to tag. Then I would be all adrift and not know which way to sail." "Harold," said Wood, "please go and sing that to the sirens. I am wise to your ingenious sophistries. You are in love with a lady, O poet. That, and not a lacking initiative, is the reason of your singular fidelity to yon tube." Applebo raised his tawny head and blinked once or twice at his guest. Then, in the same dreamy way, he lowered his full cup from his lips. Nothing was more remote from his manner than any hint of agitation, wherefore it struck Wood as odd that he should have let the cup turn in his hand and spill the scalding tea on the dorsum of his bare foot. "Confound it," quoth the poet, and grabbed at his foot. The teacup struck the edge of the spirit stove and broke, leaving the porcelain ring of the handle on Applebo's finger. Forgetting his foot, he looked at it and blinked. "There," said he. "That is the second time that this has happened. A ring upon my finger the minute that my true motive is questioned. I do not like that." "You ought to," observed Wood, "since you are in love with her." "Not necessarily. My intentions are honorable, but not matrimonial, and a ring is not the symbol of love, but of marriage." "Cynic." "No. Poet. Love to the poet is part of his material. It is the most important of his implements of craft, his motive force. I love, but I ask nothing in return, beyond being permitted to love from afar. But not too far. A poet must be in the general neighborhood of his inspiration. Stop! My tea is coming up. Worldling! No doubt you are in love with her yourself." The voice of the poet held the tone of one being roused from a beauty sleep. "I hope that you are, and that she returns your passion. So much the better. A hopeless love is always productive of the purest verse. The Italian poets understood this. It is all that I needed. If I listen to you any longer, you will have to chain me to the mainmast with the fin. Why did you pick out Hermione?" The eyes of the poet shot him a yellow gleam. "What makes you think that it is Hermione?" "You were yapping her name as I came alongside. Never mind, I will not betray you, but I wish that you would let me tell them that it is hopeless passion and not feeble-mindedness which leads you on in the wake of the shark. They would be so pleased." "Tell them, if you like. It does not matter, since we are destined never to meet. But don't tell which one I am in love with. The others might tease her. All women are cats." A lover-like opinion. "I am very fond of cats. They are my index, just as yellow is my color. I am really very much in love with Hermione." "When did you see her?" "Last winter. It was her superb walk that vanquished me. I have never seen her bow on. Last winter, on my way down Fifth Avenue every morning to breakfast at the club, I often overhauled her, but I never passed. She drifted along like a marsh, lily gathered by the flood. But she might enjoy meeting you. Applebo shook his head. I am wedded to my muse. She will not brook a rival. Should Hermione enter my life, I would never write another poem. You see, I would be merely living one. Have a macaroon. There is very little mould on this one. Wood glanced at him with suspicion, but Applebo's face would have made that of the Sphinx look open and confiding. A big yellow tomcat he appeared as he sat there, great shoulders hunched forward, back bent, blinking impenetrably at his guest. He finished a macaroon and licked the crumbs from his lips, and looked even cattier. It would not have surprised his guest had he begun to purr. "Where did you learn so much seamanship?" asked Wood. "Captain Bell says that the way you find your way around is uncanny." Applebo waved his hand and shrugged. "A mere instinct. One might almost say a lower attribute and shared with birds, mammals, and fishes. I am not proud of it. Do you write poems of the sea?" "Sometimes, but the subject does not interest me. A great, empty, desolate waste of wet. No, why write poems of the sea when there are so many lovable things? Old gardens and dear old people, little children and lovely women. The last, always in the abstract." His amber eyes glowed. Wood stared at him keenly, but Applebo appeared oblivious. Wood rose to his feet. "It is almost 2 bells," said he. "I must be getting back. Sorry you will not come." "Thank you, dear boy. Please make all of my excuses. Tell them what you like. Only mention no names. Express my deep appreciation of their goodness, and thank them in my name for permitting me to rot around in their wake. Goodbye. God bless you." In a very pensive mood, Wood pulled back to the Shark, where his lack of success was received somewhat caustically by Cécile. But at the luncheon table, Wood had his revenge. "It is just as I thought," said he. "Applebo's plea that he follows the Shark about to save himself the wear and tear of deciding where to go is all a bluff." Had he been looking at Hermione as he made this statement, Wood might have seen something in her face to have given him food for thought. But he was looking at Cécile, not without a certain touch of malice. Since the coquette had rather cruelly thrown him over, after having given him reason to believe that he was not indifferent to her, Wood had done a good deal of thinking, finally to arrive at the conclusion that all had happened for the best, and that a girl who could find it in her heart to do this sort of thing was not the girl that any man should want to marry. He no longer loved Cécile, and was therefore no longer blind to her faults. Conspicuous amongst these was a tremendous appreciation of her own charms, and Wood felt instinctively that, on learning of Applebo's confession, Cécile would immediately appropriate this devotion to herself. Wood bore no rancour for her treatment of himself, but he would scarcely have been human had he not found a certain cynical enjoyment in the situation. "I am not at liberty to mention any names," said he, "but when I directly accused him of being secretly in love with some lady aboard the Shark, Applebo acknowledged that this was the fact." Hermione's blue eyes opened very wide, and a sudden rich colour flooded her face. Captain Bell and Wood were, however, looking at Cécile. Paula, the second sister, was lunching with friends ashore. Cécile's black, curving lashes swept down, and she looked at her plate and laughed, while a delicate colour tinged her soft cheeks. Secretly, she had suspected for a long time precisely what Wood had just stated, and the news brought to her that flush of triumph which attended every new and interesting conquest. Captain Bell surveyed his eldest daughter with disgust. "My word," he snapped. "Has it come to a point where they follow her around in boats?" Wood glanced at Hermione with the slightest suspicion of a wink. She coloured and laughed. Hermione and Cécile had but little in common, and aside from a certain amount of sisterly affection, were rather indifferent to each other. Cécile disapproved Hermione's frank, impetuous manner, and Hermione detested her sister's cold-blooded coquetries. Both of the girls adored their sister Paula. "Applebo's is a somewhat peculiar devotion," Wood observed, "but that is to be expected, considering Applebo. He asks only to worship from afar. It appears that his sentiment is useful as a source of inspiration." motive force, as he expressed it. He even went so far as to say that it would profit him even more if some other person were to win the heart of his inamorata, as hopeless passion was always productive of the best poetic results. "Huh," grunted Bell. "I told you he was a balm." "So he intends never to meet me, us?" Cécile corrected herself, but not in time to save the laugh. "A modest young person, my daughter Cécile," said Bell dryly. "Of course, it's not within the scope of human possibility that Paula or Hermione should have found favor in the eyes of this omelette head. Cut another notch in your gunstock, my dear." And he continued in this ironic strain until Hermione and Wood took pity on Cécile and changed the conversation by sheer weight of voices. Toward the middle of the afternoon, Paula Bell returned aboard. There was nothing of the sea about this girl, who was wholly of the warm and comforting earth. Paula's type was such as one sees in the sculptured figures of French public buildings, lending themselves to emblematic decoration and representing Ceres with overflowing cornucopia, Justitia with her scales, or perhaps an opulent creature to depict la vendange, the vintage or return of the grape. In face and figure, Paula might have posed for one of these splendid, heroic sculptures. Already, at 22, her form was gracefully mature, and her face, pure of feature, had that pretty alluringness of expression with which the French sculptors know so well how to sweeten and vitalize the classic Greek. We Anglo-Saxons, on the contrary, seeking to copy directly from the ancients, are too apt to get as a result the well-known frozen-faced females which suggest rather George Washington, a suffragette, or an idealized William Jennings Bryan than the desired mother of the earth. "What do you think?" cried Paula. "I met the pilot fish face to face." "You did?" cried Hermione. "What did he do?" "Nothing." It was in the post office. He stood with his eyes fixed on infinity while the clerk sorted his mail. He is very striking in appearance and as graceful as a panther. People turned to look at him. "How was he dressed?" asked Cécile. "Beautifully, but not the least hint of the nautical. White serge suit, straw-coloured pongee shirt with a dark, smoky orange colour tie, yellow buckskin shoes. His hair is long and beautifully ondulé. Such a chevelure is wasted on most men, but not on the pilot fish. I wonder if he sleeps with it in papers." "No," said Wood. "It has always been like that. Freshman year, the Sophs tried to cut it for him. The infirmary did a big business for a week. His bullpup and parrot got in the game and bit one man and gouged the ear of another. The next night, the Sophs went back in force to do the job or die. Harold waited until they got inside, then locked the door, threw the key under the bed, and pulled aside the curtains of an alcove. Here was a forbidding-looking keg with powder stenciled on the side in big red letters and a fuse in the top. Before anybody could stop him, Harold let out a fearful yell and lighted the fuse. It began to sputter, and the Sophs lost interest in Harold's hair. You see, he was known to be such a wild freak that there was no telling what he might not do, so out they went, taking the door with them and piling up in a heap in the corridor, which was narrow. The fuse reached the bunghole when there came a sort of mild explosion. One man fainted. When the smoke cleared away, there was Harold drawing beer out of the other end of the keg. They let him keep his hair. Cécile did not join in the laughter of the others. "Then he is a sort of clown?" she asked, a little sharply. Wood shook his head. "Not a bit. It seems to me that the others were the ones to perform." Cécile made no answer. To herself, she was registering a little vow that she would put the leonine Mr. Applebo through his tricks, and that before she was many days older. There was to be a little dinner party aboard the Shark that night, and Captain Bell, the most recent of whose fads was the culinary arts, had spent his morning in the galley, preparing certain dishes with which to surprise his guests. This innocent pastime of their father's had been encouraged by the girls. As Hermione said, it kept him out of mischief, while the heat of the galley, acting as a Turkish bath, was good for his asthma. In the present instance, however, this beneficial occupation was destined to directly affect the future affairs of several people, notably those of Mr. Harold Applebo. It was during the soup course Captain Bell ventured to expand a little to his guests on the higher attributes of the culinary art. A cook, he observed didactically, is far above the menial class. He is an artist and entitled to the same respectful consideration which might be shown a sculptor, painter, poet, or musician. More, in fact, because a cook ministers, not only to our aesthetic sense and intellectual demands, but to the physical as well. In substantiation of these statements, I am about to offer you an entree made this morning by my own hands. Ah! The peroration was cut short by the entrance of the steward bearing the gastronomic chef-d'oeuvre, which was in the form of a vol au vent, or chicken pie. At first glance, the dish appeared to be highly successful. The crust was brown and flaky, and seemed to promise succulent delicacies within. After the first anxious glance, Captain Bell sank back into his chair and looked about with the benevolent expression of one about to confer a rare treat upon his friends. The steward, struggling manfully with his grin, presented the dish to Cécile, who proceeded to attack it with a blunt knife. The crust sagged like the head of a slack drum, but refused to give up its dead. Cécile exerted a little more pressure. The crust held valiantly, while certain unhallowed gurglings came from beneath. Everybody was watching Cécile with that painful anxiety peculiar to such moments. Bell began to fidget. "Cut into it," he snapped. "The chicken ain't going to bite you." The popular tension found relief in a laugh at this witticism. Bell glared, and the ill-timed mirth subsided. Cécile threw her solid weight upon the knife. It bent, and a tiny jet of juice found its exit, hitting Mr. Poole in the eye. He wiped it furtively, and the others pretended not to have observed the accident. "Briggs, give me a pointed knife," said Cécile. "Of course," growled Bell. "Always serve a pointed knife with a pastry." The perspiring Briggs fetched the desired weapon. Thus armed, Cécile successfully attacked the crust, which she flayed back as one might skin an animal. She helped herself daintily, and the dish was passed to Wood, all eyes watching him as though he were about to draw in any other lottery. Politic youth that he was, Wood helped himself generously when there rolled out of the gravy upon his plate a small kitchen salt cellar. "Thunderation!" snapped the host. "So that's where it went. I hunted half an hour for that thing." "Papa," protested Cécile. Nobody else could speak, and the faces around the board were crimson. Their host was known by his guests to take himself very seriously. Wood tried again, this time exhuming what appeared to be a misshapen piece of rubber, but which a clever comparative anatomist might have recognized as the sacrum of a fowl with its muscular attachments. "It smells delicious," said the young man. He tried to cut the lump which slipped from beneath his knife and bounded across the saloon. Wood's face expressed polite disappointment at the loss of the relish. The suffering steward, unable to look at him, hurried on with the dish, passing it next to Hermione, who ripped off a ragged piece of the crust, which he proceeded to cover with a substance much resembling asphalt. Mr. Poole, Wood's host on the Arcturus, came next. The face of this gentleman was painfully congested, and his hand trembled so that he could scarcely hold the spoon. Bell watched him narrowly. It was at moments such as these that he was apt to form his friendships and enmities. Hermione saw that Poole was not up to the ordeal and came generously to the rescue. "Be careful," said she. "Papa lost his watch a few days ago, and he would never forgive you if you were to break it." Even Captain Bell had to join in the roar which followed, but there was a fighting gleam in his eye which boded ill for somebody. "That's right. Laugh," roared Bell. "Funny, ain't it? And you girls know perfectly well that this is the first dish of mine that's gone wrong since the casserole blew up and we had to raise the cook's wages," said Hermione. "It's all the fault of that infernal pilot fish and his swab-headed, swivel-eyed fin," stormed Bell, oblivious to all attempts at restraint. "How in the deuce am I going to cook a dish requiring care and watchfulness with all hands? Cook, scullion." "And yourself?" "And myself, then, breaking for the rail every time some square-head for'ard sights a fishing boat? That's the way the salt cellar got lost. I set it down on the crust for a second to take a look, and it got drawn in like it might have in any other quicksand, supplied Hermione. No fear nor respect of the host could drown the roar which followed, and stifled echoes of which appeared to come from the pantry, whither the steward had fled. Bell was, however, furious. "Steward!" he bawled. The unhappy man appeared, saddened, to judge by the funereal expression of his face, and the tears still brimming in his eyes. "Take this dish forward," said Bell, with great dignity, "and present it, with my compliments, to Captain Heldstrom and the mate." "How about the corroded top of that salt cellar, Papa?" asked Paula. "Might not that be poisonous?" "It doesn't need the salt cellar," Hermione whispered to the writhing Mr. Poole. That may be so, Bell assented. "Wonder none of the rest of you had the wit to think of it. Steward, ... Sir, carry the blamed thing up and heave it overboard." Bell glared savagely about him. "There's a whole morning's work and 2 fine chickens. No, 3. 3. Yes. The first one I accidentally dropped overboard while looking for the pilot fish. Curse the pilot fish. I say, curse him. It's all his fault. He has got this whole ship's company going all ways at once, like a school of gallied whales. I'll fix him. I'll lead him a chase. I'll wear him out, confound him, or know the reason why. Wants to follows us, does he? Right-o. I'll keep him on the trot till his tongue hangs out." "How?" asked Cécile. "By keeping him on the move. We'll lead him a chase from Cape Race to Key West and never give him a chance to eat. Who wants to bet me that he'll be with us at the end of a fortnight? Come with us, Wood. You've got nothing to do and I'll show you some fun. A sort of chasse à course. Will you come?" "Oh, do, Huntington," Paula cried. Wood glanced at Cécile. "Do come, if it would amuse you," said she. "Who wants to bet me that this chump will still be in the hunt 2 weeks from now?" cried Bell. "What? No takers?" "Wait until we start," said Hermione. Chapter 4. Hermione, that strenuous nymph, was in the habit of early rising for a row in her little skiff, finishing up with a plunge. After that, bed again, where she devoured bacon and eggs, coffee, and perhaps kippers or haddock. Sometimes Paula accompanied her, but never Cécile. This luxurious beauty had no taste for cold and sticky Maine sea-water. She liked hers warm and fresh, in a tub at about 10. As for Captain Bell, he never appeared on deck when in port until after déjeuner, which was served at 12. None of the family got to bed before midnight, usually playing bridge until all hours. When there were no guests, Hermione and Cécile always played against Paula and their father. This may have been the reason why the eldest and youngest sister were not particularly devoted chums. The morning after the dinner episode of the salt cellar, Hermione was up as usual at about 6. For these matutinal excursions, she always wore her bathing suit, a simple but exceedingly becoming costume of cucumber green, trimmed with maroon, and an apology for a skirt which reached to a little above her pretty knees. Her hair was snugly coiffed in a dark crimson kerchief, and, taking her, as sailors say, full and by, Hermione was well worth getting up at sunrise to see. As a general thing, ladies are not supposed to appear on the deck of a yacht before 8 bells, but the Shark was more of a home than a yacht, and Hermione sent the steward to prepare the way before her. Captain Heldstrom was always up, and Hermione was, under his strict injunction, never to go where she could not be sighted from the schooner. Usually the girl contented herself with pulling about the harbour, taking her plunge alongside on her return. Sometimes, however, when lying in some wild and picturesque harbour, she would land on the beach to explore, or perhaps have a try for snipe with her little 16-bore. Often she gathered wildflowers for the breakfast table, and taking it all together, these early morning rambles were the best part of Hermione's day. On this particular occasion, she decided for a stroll along the shore on the eastern side of the bay, and as the place looked promising for birds, she took her gun and a game bag containing a few cartridges. As she went on deck, the quartermaster told her that Captain Heldstrom had gone ashore on some business of the vessel, for Captain Bell had announced that the shark was in for a couple of weeks continually underway, and it was generally understood that this was a sporting attempt to shake off the pilot fish. In fact, bets as to the success of the undertaking were already in process of registry. Olsen helped her into her skiff, and Hermione pulled away in the direction of the beach, reflecting naughtily to herself that since Heldstrom was ashore, she might take advantage of the fact to have a look at the salt marsh on the other side of a strip of dwarf pines growing almost to the water's edge. The night before, she had observed flocks of snipe and plover circling this marsh, also a bunch of curlew, and being a very good shot, she did not see what was to prevent her from getting a good bag. True, the whole place was preserved by the Shoal Harbour Gun and Fish Club, of which her father was not a member, but to Hermione this fact merely added zest to her expedition. Halfway to the beach she passed within about 200 yards of the Daffodil, at which she looked curiously. Nobody was in sight, and the dinghy was hanging out astern. Lazy beast, thought Hermione, with the contempt of the early riser for the sloths who are still in bed. She fetched up at the beach, a good mile from the shark, and leaped ashore, grapnel in one hand and her little double-barreled gun in the other. The tide was well out, and on reaching a point whence she could look over into the little lagoon, with its encircling strip of marsh, Hermione could see several flocks of plover and big snipe weaving here and there, like motes of dust eddying in the breeze, while their clear whistlings reached her, sharp and sweet in the morning air. She passed quickly over the crest of the beach and hurried toward a point some quarter of a mile distant where the pine scrub grew down to skirt the sedge. As the tide was far out, Hermione judged that, in all probability, the sedge was full of feeding birds, so she loaded her gun and started in to beat out the rim of the marsh. Scarcely had she gone 50 feet when up sprang a big yellow-legged snipe, rising straight in the air as though propelled less by its wings than the spring from the long, powerful legs. He was not to be missed under the conditions. Hermione's gun flew to her shoulder, her quick eye glanced along the shining barrel, and making quite sure, she fired. The very centre of the charge found the unfortunate bird, and down it dropped, straight as a plummet. Another rose to the left. Hermione fired and missed. The two reports had aroused the marsh, however, and the air was filled with flying birds and their shrill, startled calls. A bunch of splendid golden plover, rising from the other side of the lagoon, began to circle the place, and Hermione, her breath coming quickly and her eyes like sapphires, drew back into the shelter of the pines. Straight toward her came the plover. Then, within easy range, Hermione stepped suddenly from her blind and threw up her gun. The birds immediately bunched, as she knew they would, and for a moment appeared to pause undecided in their flight. Picking a plover in the centre of the bunch, Hermione fired. Then, as the flock swerved, she fired again. It was a splendid opportunity, and for a moment Hermione held her breath at the results of her shot. Plover seemed literally to rain from the sky. Some were quite dead, others merely winged, and as they fell high up where the grass was short, Hermione was very busy for a few moments, loading and beating about for the wounded. One bird escaped into the tall grass. It seemed useless to look for him, so with her game bag bulging with the prizes already secured, Hermione decided that, since she had been making a good deal of a fusillade, and the place was, after all, a preserve, it might be just as well modestly and hastily to withdraw. Also, to tell the truth, the sight of the beautiful dead birds, their glorious plumage stained and blood-soaked, rather sickened her. It was quite one thing to shoot at a flying bird, and another to pursue him with relentless ferocity when a wounded fugitive upon the ground, finally to secure his mangled and bloody corpse. Hermione found herself suddenly sickened with the sport. The thought of the wounded little plover hiding in the sedge, perhaps dying slowly of its hurts, gave her a very uncomfortable sensation in her throat. For the instant she felt a hot desire to fling her gun into the marsh and hunt no more. "I'm finished," she said, aloud. "Hereafter I stick to the clay pigeon trap on the shark's quarterdeck. This is a nasty business." Filled with remorse, she took one of the plover from her game bag and stood for a moment looking at it as it lay in her hand. The tears sprang suddenly to her eyes. Here was a little creature which a moment before had been so joyously full of life, now a sad, blood-stained martyr to the lust of killing. Hermione stamped her small, sandaled foot. "It's downright wicked," she cried aloud. "Yeah," came a harsh, nasal voice from directly behind her. "It air downright wicked to shoot on posted ground." Sadly startled, Hermione swung about and beheld a tall, bleak, forbidding figure, whose harsh, Yankee face was quite lacking in the dry, semi-humorous quality which is to be found in so many of his type, and which the irony of his words might have led one to expect. On the contrary, it was a cruel, sneering face, with small, swinish eyes and thin, straight lips, smooth-shaven and of the expression which one associates with the witch-burners of earlier days. The man carried no gun, but held in one hand a stout cudgel. His costume was that of the vicinity, but above the visor of his battered ship's cap were the letters S, H, G, and FC. Hermione understood at once that he was a gamekeeper. The blood rushed to her face. It is always embarrassing to be taken in the act of conscious wrongdoing, but particularly so when one happens to be a young lady in a very syncopated bathing suit. Moreover, there was a quality in the man's regard which angered and embarrassed her, a sort of sneering contempt, such as a brutal officer of the law might direct towards some depraved unfortunate who was dead to all common decency. Hermione suddenly felt as one does in some silly dream where one finds oneself in the middle of a ballroom or addressing a public meeting in a nightgown. Worst of all, she knew that she was in the wrong. The gamekeeper looked her up and down, slowly and with insulting deliberation. Hermione felt her embarrassment and fright give way to anger. "Well," said she, "what do you want?" "What do I want? Hey! Wall! First off, I want that gun of your'n and them birds. After that, I want you to take a leetle walk with me and talk a mite to the superintendent. That's what I want, young woman." Hermione stared. She had had a vague idea that, if discovered by any of the club people, the worst that could happen would be the indignity of getting warned off. Even this, she had thought, would probably be done politely and with due apologies. But to be hailed like a thief before the superintendent, and that in her bathing suit, was so extreme a measure as to arouse her ridicule and anger. "Indeed," said she scornfully. "You don't want very much, do you?" The man scowled. "I don't want no more than what I'm a-going to get," he answered. Hermione's eyes began to darken. The rich blood glowed through her clear olive skin. "You think so?" she retorted. "Then let me tell you that you will get nothing but my name and address. I am Miss Bell, and my father is Captain Bell of the schooner-yacht Shark. If the club wants to do anything about this, it can go ahead and do it." The gamekeeper gave her a sullen look. "The club is going to do something about it," said he, "and it's going to do it right now and through me. I'm the game warden, and I got my orders. You'll have to come along o' me to the superintendent, and that's all there is about it. Like's not he'll let ye off with a warning. That's none of my affair. So hand over that gun and come along, quiet and peaceable." "Look here," cried Hermione fiercely. "Do you think I'm going to be taken in like a thief?" "Wall, ye air a thief, ain't ye? Them birds belong to the club." Hermione stamped her foot. The man's ugly manner was beginning to get away with her temper, never any too docile under provocation. "Take your old birds," said she, and tumbled them out upon the ground. "And let me tell you that when I go back and Captain Heldstrom learns how I've been treated, he'll come over here and wring your neck as if it belonged to one of those snipe. And if you think I'm going with you, like this—" Anger stifled her speech at the mere idea. The gamekeeper hunched his shoulders with a sneer. "If you can come ashore half-naked to shoot the club's snipe and plover," said he, "it won't hurt ye none to go a mite further and see the superintendent." His voice took an impatient rasp. "Come, I've jawed here long enough. Will you come, or have I got to drag ye thar by main force?" He took a step toward her. Hermione, light on her feet as a Spartan girl, might have saved herself by flight, but the sneering brutality of the man had torn from her the last, lingering grip she had upon a temper which had many times been the cause of her undoing. With an inarticulate little cry, she sprang back, and scarcely realizing what she did, threw the gun to her shoulder. "You beast!" she cried through her set teeth. "You try to lay hand on me, and I'll blow your head off." Now, the gamekeeper, surly brute though he may have been, came of stern and rigid Puritan stock, and once having decided upon what was his duty, meant to carry it out at all costs. He saw that the superb young huntress in front of him was beside herself with fury, and he fully realized that he was taking a terrific chance of being terribly wounded, if not killed, in his tracks. In spite of this, though the color faded under his mahogany tan, his lean jaw set squarely, lips tightened, and he began to walk steadily toward Hermione. He was within 3 paces when the girl heard a brushing noise in the pines directly behind her. The gamekeeper stopped short, and Hermione, who had raised her gun to cover his chest, saw his eyes travel past her to fill with amazement at something which he saw beyond. Half fainting and with knees that tottered under her, the girl turned to look upon a splendid Olympic figure standing against the dark background of the pines. "The pilot fish!" gasped Hermione under her breath. She lowered the gun and stood with her legs swaying under her unsteadily, staring dumbly at Applebo. Vaguely, she felt that he had arrived barely in time to save her from committing a very terrible act, though whether or not she would actually have pulled the trigger is doubtful. The chances are that at the critical moment, Hermione would either have flung aside the gun or else fired in the air, and then very likely would have had a fit of hysterics, which might have proved more alarming to the harsh longshoreman than a whole battery of weapons. Applebo stood for a moment looking from the girl to the man, his eyebrows, which were very bushy for one of his youth, drawn down over his yellow eyes, and a straight line cut vertically between them. At first glance he gave the impression of a beautifully chiseled statue in light bronze. He was clad in a swimming costume, which would have been quite de rigueur on any beach, but the material, originally some shade of yellow or sienna, had finally acquired the tone of the sun-tanned skin. Yet there was nothing startling or offensive in effect, for so beautifully was the strong, lithe body moulded that it suggested less a mortal man than some splendid, pagan demigod. Applebo stepped forward to Hermione's shoulder, and the group became complete. God and goddess they looked, she dark, tropical, vivid of colouring, he a sort of golden-hued Apollo. So striking was the effect, and so beautiful that even the harsh, unlovely warden may have felt certain rudimentary stirrings of appreciation. "Gosh, all sufficiency," he growled. "Thar's the he one. Ain't it the fashion to wear clothes no more?" "Shut your face," quoth Applebo unpoetically. "What do you mean by bothering this lady? You ought to be ashamed of yourself." "Huh," growled the keeper. "You're a nice one to talk about being ashamed, ain't you? You and your female critter." Hermione, still staring in a fascinated way at Applebo, caught the sudden flame in the amber eyes. Something swept past her with a rush like the charge of a Nubian lion. There was a flash of bare limbs, a snarl or two, the flutter of clothing, and a body which looked all arms and legs gyrating in the air. And there was the keeper rolling over and over grotesquely as a shot rabbit, and, a little to one side, stood Applebo, his body half bent, big arms crooked, and the yellow mane hanging about his ears, watching the fallen man like a cat about to spring. There was the keeper rolling over and over, grotesquely as a shot rabbit. The keeper scrambled to his feet and stood for a moment, pale and tottering, one hand on the other shoulder and a scowl on his deep-lined face. "Pull your freight," said Applebo, in his deep bass, "or I'll tear your ugly head off." Thus, no doubt, may Achilles have admonished Agamemnon, though Homer puts the speech in different words. The gamekeeper was no coward, but neither was he a fool, and although his tawny antagonist had not struck him, the sensations of the contact were those of disputing the right of way with a rapidly moving motor car. The keeper looked the situation over, but could see no good in it. Moreover, he saw a sudden yellow flame in the blinking eyes fastened upon him. Without a word, the man turned and slouched off into the pines. Applebo glanced quickly at Hermione. "Sit down," said he. "You look white." Hermione's usually robust limbs seemed to collapse beneath her, and she dropped to the pine-strewn sand. "You got here just in time," said she, tremulously. "I might have shot him." "I doubt it," said Applebo. "Your gun muzzle was weaving figure eights. It would have served him right if you had, and I'd have sworn to anything." Hermione laughed hysterically, then glanced up at the poet. He was standing a couple of paces away, his arms folded on his chest, his eyes looking out across the marsh. "It's silly of me to be so upset," said Hermione, and covered her face with her hands. "I'll be all right in a minute." "Did you know the place was posted?" asked Applebo. "Yes." "Then you really haven't any kick coming." "What?" Hermione's hands dropped to her sides, and she stared at him in amazement. Applebo glanced back indifferently, and she scarcely recognized the sleepy face and blinking eyes. He pointed to the birds which she had tumbled out of her game bag. "Taken with the goods. And I must say, you did pretty well for 3 shots. Do you like to kill things? It seems rather awful to me, especially in a woman, to slaughter little birds and animals for fun. And I suppose you would raise an awful howl about vivisection." Hermione sat bolt upright. The colour came back to her pale cheeks, and her violet eyes began to darken with anger. All sense of faintness was swept away as if by magic. Applebo was not looking at her. He was standing straight as a young poplar, his shoulder turned to her, sleepily contemplating the marsh. "If you feel that way about it," said Hermione hotly, "I wonder you came to my rescue." "I was rescuing the gamekeeper. Besides, I am under obligation to you people on the Shark for letting me tag you around. What a lovely bit of colour over there, on the other side of the lagoon. Sometimes I wish that I were a painter instead of a poet. However, if I can't paint it, I can write an ode to it when I get back aboard my boat. Why don't you write a satire on women sportsmen? That would not be polite. Besides, the idea is not an agreeable one. The thought of Diana has always been unpleasant to me." "You are not very gallant." "Gallantry," said the poet, "is the vain demonstration of superior effectiveness on the part of the male. It is more complimentary to accept a woman on the same footing." "Do you call bombarding her with silly verses accepting her on the same footing?" snapped Hermione, whose astonishment was giving way to irritation. "Ah." There came the slightest flicker from Applebo's blinking eyes. "So Hermione has told you that I have been sending her verses. I had an idea, for some reason, that she would keep it to herself." He continued his contemplative observation of the marsh. Hermione gasped and stared. For whom did he take her? "Hermione did not tell anybody," she managed to say. "But you guessed? That is better. I am glad that Hermione did not tattle, even though she sent back all of my verses." Hermione did not at once reply. She was busily trying to adjust to her mind the idea that this extraordinary individual, who for 3 months had been sending her impassioned love poems, did not even know her by sight. "Why did you write verses to Hermione?" she asked. "Because her name rhymed with C, and thee, and Leah, and me." Applebo turned to regard her with a flicker of interest. "You are rather quick on a rhyme yourself, aren't you?" he observed. "No, I wrote verses to Hermione because I was in love with her." "Indeed?" "Yes, I fell in love with her at first sight." Hermione leaned forward, clasped her hands in front of her shapely legs, and looked at the poet through narrowed lids. The colour had returned, and her violet eyes were beginning to dance mischievously. Mr. Applebo was not looking at her. Indeed, she had already observed this peculiar disinclination on his part, and it puzzled her. "Are you still in love with Hermione?" she asked. "No. She sent back my verses." "How did you happen to fall in love with her?" "It was last winter. Walking down Fifth Avenue to my club for breakfast, I sometimes overtook her. An acquaintance who joined me one day told me who she was. You were all down south at the time, and Hermione was stopping with your aunt. I fell in love with her walk. Vera incessu patuit dea. He threw her one of his brief glances. Your walk is rather like hers, a sort of family resemblance. But less graceful. You are more of a mortal maid. Which is a way of saying more of a lump, snapped Hermione. Do you know which of the others I am? That is too easy, said Applebo sleepily. You are Cécile, the beauty of the family. Thank you. And the flirt? So it is said. My reputation is as bad as that. Everybody knows you smashed up Huntington Wood. He is one of the few men whom I care to claim as a friend. You have broken up others too, have you not? I wonder you dare to talk to me, said Hermione. I would like to be smashed up. It would help my verse. If you don't mind, I believe I will transfer my devotion to you. This entails no obligation on your part, except to read my verses. Hermione stared up at him suspiciously. Applebo was standing as straight as a mast, his fine profile turned to her. Hermione made a little motion as though to rise. If the poet observed it, he gave no sign, and she was obliged to scramble to her feet without the aid of the strong grasp, which, for some peculiar reason, she craved. Up she sprang, a dark flush on either cheek and her red lips pouting. Hermione was not accustomed to such neglect. Her crimson turbaned head came a little above the poet's shoulder. Still his eyes evaded her. I don't know that I am so keen for a cavalier who thinks more of his verse than he does of its object, said she. That's because you are a flirt, said Applebo. Really, though, it would be a good moral tonic for you. To receive love poems from a man who was in love with you purely in the abstract. But where's the fun? That's so. Applebo assented and looked at her with slightly more interest, as at one suggesting a new idea. Something in Hermione's eyes seemed to catch his own and hold them. The sleepy lids opened a little wider, and a golden flame darted out toward the deep violet one so close to his own. Inflammable stuff it must have found, yet it did not tarry to set this alight, but coursed on until Hermione felt it tingling through every nerve and fibre. It was quite a new sensation, this, yet carried with it something anciently familiar, so that while startled, she was not shocked, but merely confused and rendered slightly incoherent in her thoughts. And then, as though this were not liberty enough, here came Applebo's deep bass, resonant yet soft as the purr of a cat, stealing in to assault her reason through another breach, the auditory one. Hermione, for the second time that day, found her usually stable impulses all adrift. You are uncommonly lovely, said Applebo. What a pity that you must be such a coquette. Is Hermione like that? Hermione stamped her little sandaled foot. Do you take everything on hearsay? She snapped. One would give you credit for more originality. That is the reason I am so surprised. You do not look ruthless. But then, he glanced back at the lagoon. One can never tell. No doubt, it is not your fault. You have probably been horribly spoiled. Most men would want to spoil you. Would you? As long as you were good. And if I were bad? There was a short silence. I think, said Applebo, that it is time that you were getting back aboard the Shark. Your people might be anxious. Hermione bit her lips with vexation. She had quite forgotten everything but the poet. You are quite right, said she, icily. I will walk with you as far as your boat, said Applebo. Chapter 5. Hermione glanced down at the birds lying upon the sand. Since I have so wickedly and unfemininely slain them, said she, I might as well take them along. Yes, Applebo assented. Besides, they are evidence against you. Hermione tossed her head. That makes no difference. I shall not deny having shot them. If I am a flirt and a poacher and a cruel and ruthless slayer, I am at least honest. When caught, amended Applebo. He gathered up the plover, tossed them into the sack, and slung it on his shoulder, then took Hermione's gun from her slightly resisting hands. I can carry it, she said. Let me, answered the poet. It offends my sense of fitness to see you with a weapon in your hands. You do not need it. Your eyes are quite enough." "You have a singular gift for involved compliments," said Hermione. "These are only truths, and the truth is always involved when told to a woman. That is the reason why so few of us tell it." "Do you tell it?" "In part. I find that more deceptive than lying." He turned, as though to walk back toward the beach. Hermione, newly vexed that he should be the one to bring the interview to a close, took a pace which carried her past and ahead of him. The poet made no effort to catch her up. He strolled on with the nonchalance of one taking a solitary ramble. Occasionally he paused to admire the early morning colours over the sea and marsh. Several paces ahead of him, Hermione paused and looked back over her shoulder. The poet was regarding her contemplatively. His eyes met hers, and he smiled. "You are spoiled, aren't you?" said he. "In what way?" Hermione demanded hotly. "In every way, it seems to me." Applebo regarded her thoughtfully. "Let's hurry. I want to write a poem about lovely, conscious things that—" "Come on, then," Hermione interrupted. "You make me tired. Let's hurry back, and you can write your silly poem and go into ecstasies over your aesthetic sensibilities, just as my father does over his cooking, and heaven knows a worse cook never spoiled a broth." "What?" cried Applebo. "But that's not fair. Have you ever seen any of my verses?" "No," replied Hermione, greatly exulting in the lie. "Then you are not fair, naturally. But then, if you were, you would not be truly feminine. Never try to be. It is the secret of mundane failure to be fair, as you have probably felt, instinctively, being too young to have found it out in any other way. I will write a poem about you. I will call it The Petulant Poppy." "Help!" gasped Hermione. "Don't you like the title?" "But why Poppy?" "You look like a poppy, with your black head and red kerchief. There are other reasons, certain things connected with poppies. They are full of dope. How is it that you are permitted to knock around at this hour without a duenna?" "I am not," Hermione replied. "This is strictly against the rules, and there is a bad time in store for me when I have to face Uncle Chris." "Who is Uncle Chris?" "He is our sailing master, Uncle Chris Heldstrom. What's the matter?" For the poet had stopped short in his tracks and was staring at her with an expression which Hermione found almost startling. The long eyelashes, which were several shades darker than his tawny hair, swept up, opening to their fullest width, and the yellow eyes blazed at the girl with a sudden, vivid intensity. Hermione, startled and fascinated, stared back in wonder, and under her inquiring gaze the blood faded from the face of the poet, to leave it of a distressing pallor. But only for an instant or two did this last. Back came the rich, ruddy saffron. The eyelashes swept down, and the poet caught a deep breath and blinked at her, then smiled. The transformation was like that which one sees in a cat watching a canary, then suddenly surprised by some member of the household. "What made you look like that?" demanded the girl. Applebo blinked several times, then shrugged. "Did I look surprised? It struck me as a bit odd that you should call your sailing master Uncle Chris and be in dread of his displeasure. I have seen him. He is merely a Norwegian sailor, is he not?" "He is that and more," retorted Hermione. "He is the most splendid man that ever lived, the sort of stuff that is sung of in old sagas." "What do you know about sagas?" "A great deal. Uncle Chris has taught me a lot about Scandinavian legend and folklore. He is one of those big-hearted, big-souled men with the high courage of an early sea king and the heart of a child, or better, perhaps, a mother. He has been a mother to my sisters and myself." She glanced curiously at Applebo. As if to evade her scrutiny, he turned away, but not before she had caught a sudden gleam from his amber eyes, which had darkened again and were almost veiled in their habitual manner. Hermione also observed that there was a dark, smoky flush which extended up the strongly muscled neck to disappear under the clustering mane about his ears, and that the big chest was rising and falling more forcefully than their easy pace would seem to warrant. "What is the matter with you?" she asked curiously. He turned to her slowly. "Do you think," he asked, "that your Uncle Chris was ever more than a common sailor, to begin with?" "Christian Heldstrom was never a common anything," replied Hermione with some heat. "But so far as that goes, he was born of a good, though poor, Norwegian family, and went to sea because he liked it and had to do something. I know very little about his early history. He does not like to talk about it. Why does it interest you? Are you, like some other people whom I have known, so snobbish as to be shocked that 3 young ladies should have been nursed and tended and taught deportment by their father's Norwegian sailing master? Let me tell you, his manners are far better than papa's, and papa is an F.F.Phi. She looked at him truculently. Nothing could arouse Hermione to such quick and torrid resentment as any slight on her beloved Uncle Chris. Wherefore she turned her dark violet eyes challengingly upon the poet. "You look like a Scandinavian yourself," said she. "My mother," replied Applebo, "was a cousin to the King of Sweden." Hermione stopped short to stare at him. Her eyes opened very wide. Also, her carmine lips were slightly farther apart than strict deportment would approve. "Really?" she cried. "And your father?" She married beneath her. It was an infatuation followed by a wedding and an elopement. Of course, she sacrificed her rank. They came to America. It is a long story, and both of my parents are now dead. Applebo is the name of an uncle who made me his heir. He was a Swede. I don't know why I am telling you all of this. Perhaps it is because I don't want you to think that I am a snob. I would rather you did not tell anybody, if you don't mind." "Of course not," replied Hermione, "but I would like to hear more. Just now, your own affairs are more important. You had better get back aboard as soon as possible, or your sailing master may put you in the brig. What would he say if he saw you walking on the beach with me? It's rather a delicate situation, considering my unsolicited attentions of the past 3 months." Hermione's piquant face took on a very rich tone of red. Without answering, she began to walk rapidly toward the beach. So rapidly, in fact, that the first few steps carried her on in advance of her companion, who seemed tranquilly determined to set the pace himself. Hermione glanced back over her shoulder. "Since you are in such a hurry to get rid of me," she said, "why don't you hurry?" "I was admiring your walk. It must be a family accomplishment. Inherited from your mother, no doubt. Your father walks like a duck." "Thank you, on the part of all of us. Does my walk remind you of Hermione?" "Not in the least. Hermione walks like a gossamer borne by the breeze. And I stump along like a watch officer. Number. Your feet are coquetting with the earth. Hermione had no feet. She was borne by invisible wings. I rather fancy that every part of you coquettes with everything it touches. You were making love to the snipe you had just slaughtered when the gamekeeper collared you. I was watching from the sedge." "You were," cried Hermione. "And you never interfered." "Pardon me. I did interfere, when I thought that there was a chance of your loading him full of lead. You see, I swam ashore to contemplate the early sunlight on the marsh in order to receive certain impressions which might lead to a poem. Then you came along and spoiled it all." "Thanks. Please do not interrupt. If you don't like what I am telling you, just say so, and we will talk of something else. I will tell you how beautiful you are. That is, no doubt, a hackneyed subject, but perhaps I can find a new way of putting it. Please don't be silly. Go on. I came along and spoiled it all." "Utterly. I was chock-a-block with aesthetic appreciation. I was delighting in the smell of salt sedge and piney perfumes, reveling in the music of joyous bird calls, loving the companionship of snipe and curlew and plover, free-winged sea nomads like myself, exulting in my human solitude, getting warm after my swim, chewing tobacco." "What?" "The fifth sense. I had had no breakfast, and I am very fond of chewing tobacco, when alone. Please don't interrupt. Everything was perfect. And then you came, and spoiled it all." Hermione's small nose, already tampering sadly with the classic in its modernly rebellious tip, became even more artistically anarchistic. "Oh, very well." Applebo's voice expressed polite fatigue. "If you will interrupt. I love the shade of your bathing suit. It makes you look like a Nereid, who has found a copy of L'Art et la Mode shucked off La Provence and got discontented with algae. Shall I describe your ravishing face? Black storm clouds your hair, and beneath the snow of your forehead falling into the ultramarine sea of your eyes, a sea so deep and fathomless that— Shut up. Pardon? Close your face, snapped Hermione. Very well. Only it's not my fault. You would shove your oar in. Do you think that is a nice way to speak to a lady? I am not talking to a lady. There are lots of ladies. I am talking to a modern reincarnation of Artemis, who, as you probably do not know, was the ancient Greek personification of physical sweetness and purity, whom the brutal Romans had the cheek to degenerate into Diana, a bloodthirsty goddess of killing things, snipe or plover, or gamekeepers, or pilot fishes, or— Oh, please. Hermione looked as if about to break down. Must I remind you that I've had rather a trying morning of it? Cécile, cried the pilot fish, I'm sorry. Hermione found no particular stimulant in his sorrows, but the Cécile acted very tonically. Up went nose and chin again. Then drop personalities and go on with what you were saying about the way I spoiled it all. Your aesthetic revels, and the tobacco and the rest. Well then, continued Applebo, I was so content with everything as it was that when you came and began to kill my little snipe and spoil their music with a fusillade and swamp the odours of resin and marsh with fumes of sulphur and saltpetre and obscure the landscape with smoke and generally put things on the blink, that was easy for you. The poet waved his hand. I swallowed my little cud. What? Excuse me. Pray go on. I was wild with indignation, especially as I recognized you. You did? I said, here is that pampered beauty, Cécile Bell, not content with breaking up all the men who know her, or ought to, must come over here and kill these little birds and smell up the marsh. Oh, come. Well, that acrid powder, you know. Therefore, when I saw the keeper stalking you, I was tickled to death. And you'd have let him run me in? I felt like helping, but when he got nasty, I sympathized with you. He was right. You were wrong all the way through. Merci. And you? I was wrong too. I should have let him take you to the superintendent. It would have done you good in so many different ways. Why didn't you— Applebo gave her a quick look. I couldn't, he said, and looked straight into her eyes. Hermione's heart gave a sudden, tremendous throb. In that quick little psychological moment, which lasted only as long as it took their eyes to meet, wonderful changes were wrought. Or perhaps they were not changes, but only the crystallizing of instincts and emotions some few thousands of years older than Hermione. At any rate, what scientists would call empirical symptoms were most pronounced. Every little dormant cell of the many millions which go to make a Hermione, or any of the rest of us, suddenly awoke and began to shout for something which was owed it, and for which it felt, for the first time, a strong and immediate need. This is a clumsy way of trying to express what sentimentalists call love at first sight, which, when all is said, is really no more than the love of a pussy willow for the first promise of warmth to come, with no consideration of intervening frosts. For good or bad, that was what happened to Hermione, and all of the many queer, complex emotions found their resultant in a quick, primitive impulse of which the keynote was to make the man beside her say, with truth, that nothing really mattered but herself. This Mr. Applebo politely declined to do. Having instincts of his own and a decency peculiar to the cat family, he merely blinked at Hermione and waited for her to start that most ruthless of all duels which cynics have tried to misinterpret as love. Then you only interfered, said Hermione, because you thought that I might have shot the keeper. It wasn't that you wished to render a service to a woman. It was merely a general humanitarian desire to prevent bloodshed, a tragedy. Nope. What? It wasn't that. You would not have shot him. Never. He would have dragged you weeping and half-clothed. Never. Yes, That was what I wanted him to do. But when the time came, I changed my mind. At least, I changed my behavior. My mind is still the same. You were quite in the wrong. The gamekeeper was right, and meant to obey orders if it cost him his life. But you would not have shot him. I had no real fear of that, and theoretically, I wanted him to march you off and teach you a lesson. But when you threw that despairing look around, something brought me to your aid with a rush. I could have broken his neck without a twinge of compunction. He rather expressed my feeling when he said, "Thar's the he one." Applebo laughed. I felt like that, as though I were some wild creature and my mate was in trouble. I beg your pardon, Cécile. Again the rush of emotion, followed by the cold shower. Hermione's pulses seemed filled with wine and her youthful body with that warm, intoxicating glow, incomprehensible as it was delicious. When there came that Cécile, and she felt like the hot iron plunged by the smith into his tub of water. No doubt the tempering process was good for her, but she did not like it, and hissed a little, just as does the glowing metal. Then it wasn't chivalry, she snapped, but a sort of primitive male instinct. Absolutely. A woman with a gun and a lot of slaughtered little plover is no inspiring object for chivalry, which is, after all, principally a masculine pose. But she may awaken other sentiments. That is what you have done. I no longer regret Hermione and my rejected verses. And that reminds me that you have not yet told me that I might transfer my attentions to you. I think that you are the most lovely creature that I ever saw, and you might awaken lots of tenderness if you would. I am sure that I could write exquisite things to you. I would feel them too, which I never did toward Hermione. Poor Hermione. The poet was snatching her from one emotion to another in a manner most upsetting. Pique kept her from telling him then and there that she was not Cécile, that she was Hermione, the object of 3 months' poetic effusion on his part, unrecognized in her true personality and unjustly vilified as a heartless coquette. Instinct told her, however, that the more he abused Cécile and deplored Hermione's heartless conduct, the worse he would feel when he learned the truth, and Hermione meant that his punishment should be thorough. A full-natured woman inherits from her primitive forebears a good deal of antagonism for the heart-compelling male, and so far Hermione had not struck back. She meant to do so effectively when the time came. Applebo was awakening her to many new sensations, but she was very far from being conquered. So she tossed her pretty head and remarked, "Verse does not appeal to me except in an impersonal, purely mental sort of way. If that contents you, go ahead and write it by the running foot. Like Hermione, I am not very keen about long-distance devotion. If you transfer your attentions to me, there will be certain responsibilities attached. The first is that you call and meet my family in a purely conventional way." Mr. Applebo looked scared. "Oh, in that case, perhaps, do you suppose that your sister Pauline—" "Paula," corrected Hermione icily. "Paula. Quite so. I wonder if Paula would mind if—" Hermione stopped short and stared. The colour flooded her face. She was suddenly the prey of a violent desire to do the man beside her a physical damage. She felt that she would like to snatch the gun from his hands and bang him over the head with the stock. Applebo looked at her and blinked. "Don't be angry," said he. "I would never have the nerve to go aboard the Shark. I'm an awful coward about most things. Besides, I hate the idea of being listed on your collection. I wonder what you would label me." "Fool's gold," snapped Hermione. "That would be unjust to yourself, if I were yours," answered the poet sleepily. "All love is pure gold, but often there is a lot of base metal alloyed. I love you, Cécile." He blinked. Hermione laughed. "Then go and smelt out the alloy," said she. "That consists principally of a deep and sincere affection for Mr. Applebo." She turned to look at him, her head critically aslant. The poet looked back. Hermione's heart began to misbehave again, and a delicious colour burned warmly through her clear olive skin. Her deep violet eyes looked almost purple in the crimson sunlight pervading the early morning air. Her chin was slightly raised, and her red lips invitingly apart as she waited for his reply. Without in the least suspecting it, Hermione looked like a girl who defies the kiss which she fully intends to get. Had the poet acted like a man, or a scoundrel, as one prefers to look at it, and kissed Hermione then and there with that enthusiasm which her prettiness and the situation as a whole appeared to warrant, there is absolutely no telling what might have happened. Instead of which, Mr. Applebo's face grew sleepier, and his eyes blinkier than ever, while the look which he threw at Hermione was full of appreciation of a purely impersonal character. Huntington Wood smelted out his alloy, he observed. Instead of bewailing his ill fortune and howling for sympathy, he went off and started a home for sick babies. Now he is back again, pure metal. Do you suppose that it will do him any good? Hermione felt that she would like to employ some of her father's forceful seagoing expressions. Here was Cécile popping up again to spoil everything at the most interesting moment. Yet not for the world would she point out to him his silly mistake. She intended that this disillusionment should come as a coup de théâtre, which would leave the poet in a state of collapse. So she swung smartly on her heel and shrugged. Huntington Wood no longer offers his gold, and nobody can blame him, said she, and resumed her walk toward the beach. They skirted the pine scrub, passed along the edge of the marsh, then crossed the strip of sand and rock to the beach. The tide was at the last of the ebb, and as she glanced toward the spot where she had left her boat, Hermione gave a little cry of dismay. "Look!" she cried. "It's gone!" What had happened was so plainly sketched on the open page of the beach that one could run and read. Several yards above the water's edge was indicated the place where Hermione had grounded on landing, as was shown by her own tracks, left from the spot where she had stepped ashore. From farther down the beach came another trail, a man's, running to where the skiff lay, while a long furrow and some deeply gouged footprints showed where he had run the skiff down to the water's edge. Here, before the present rim of the tide was reached, all vanished, as though boat and man had taken flight into the air. Hermione threw a frightened look at Applebo. The poet was standing straight as an Indian, his bushy eyebrows drawn down, and his lips puckered. "That swine of a gamekeeper," he growled in his deep, though husky, bass. "I wish that I had broken his neck. Why didn't I think about his swiping the boat? I am a fool." Chapter 6. "What shall we do?" asked Hermione. Applebo looked at her and blinked. "Can you swim as well as you can row and shoot and walk?" he asked. Hermione looked out across the dancing waters of the bay. "It must be a good mile and a half to the Shark," said she slowly. "The yawl is about half the distance, but—" The colour flooded her face. Even under the circumstances, I should hardly care to swim to her. "No," said the poet, "that would not do. It is very perplexing." "Couldn't you swim out to your boat and come back with the dinghy?" asked Hermione. "My Finn is ashore with the dinghy, and I have no other boat. I would swim to the Shark, but I do not like to leave you here alone. That pig of a keeper probably thinks that he has got us penned, and may be back at any moment with reinforcements. He knows that we would not care to take to the back country in our bathing suits, and besides, this is a promontory, and probably wire-fenced on the side of the mainland. Perhaps the best thing for us to do would be to go straight to the club and see the superintendent. I would enjoy talking to that gentleman." "No, no, no," cried Hermione. "Think of how it would look. You might wait here and let me go alone." "No." Hermione looked at him thoughtfully. "Are you a very strong swimmer?" "I am quite at home in the wet." "Then let's try for the Shark. If I get tired, you can take me in tow." "What distance do you think that you are good for?" asked the poet. "To the yawl, at least. The chances are that we will be sighted from the Shark. In fact, we might make them see us here, but I would rather start back. If I play out, you can put me aboard the Daffodil and keep on yourself for the schooner." "All right. It is ignominious to be found this way on the beach. I'll hide the gun and game bag in the bushes at the foot of that tree." This was quickly accomplished when the two walked side by side down the sloping beach and waded slowly into the cold water. Knee-deep, the poet, who was in the lead, turned to Hermione. "Take it easy," said he, "and don't try to talk. If you feel tired, put one hand on my shoulder and keep paddling. I could tow you all of the way, if need be, but you must swim as far as you can, so as not to get chilled. The water is like ice in the channel." Hermione looked at him and nodded, and again there swept through her the warm little tingling which defied the chill of the sea. Quite a new sensation this, and one which Hermione was at a loss to comprehend, for the poet irritated even while he attracted her. He had a most vexing manner of talking to without looking at her, one indifferent glance, and his yellow eyes were wandering beyond, anywhere except in her direction. Now, apparently waiting for her to take to the water, he was staring sleepily down the beach, interested apparently in a flock of gulls circling about some stranded object. The warm sunlight smote on his yellow mane and threw soft shadows on the bare, saffron-coloured skin of the texture of velvet and glowing richly in the high lights. He splashed a little water on his powerful arms, and the long, clean-cut muscles formed shifting contours to delight a sculptor's eye. A life-size statue in dull gold looked the poet, beautiful as a demigod and no more human, for he carried a curious atmosphere of detachment to his surroundings, as though the milieu were alien to him, and he might at any moment betake himself away to his own place. Even for this lovely mortal maid beside him, he seemed to show a polite disinterestedness not usually to be found in his ancient prototypes, if we are to believe the classics. Hermione felt this, and it aroused in her a sudden fierce perversity. Again there came that swift desire to waken him out of his sleepy indifference by a physical violence. There were also the traitorous thrills. "Come on," she said, with such sharp impatience that the poet turned and blinked at her inquiringly. Hermione's blue eyes flashed, and with a sudden spiteful motion of her hand, she sent a shower of the icy water spraying over him. Applebo gasped, laughed gurglingly, and flung himself forward to swim, Hermione following. Side by side they thrust forward through the clear, cold water. Hermione was swimming prone. The poet lounged along on his side, his head half buried, the floating hair swirling about his ears, his eyes almost closed. To Hermione he looked as though he were asleep and propelled onward by some involuntary mechanism within. For 100 yards neither of them spoke. Hermione turned on her side, facing Applebo. The thinnest of amber gleams between the double fringe of eyelashes told that he was watching her. "You could swim all day, Cécile," said he. "What right have you to call me Cécile?" snapped Hermione, tired of the constantly recurring error of identity. "Even if I were, I call you Cécile, and not Miss Bell, because the latter is the conventional name, and I do not know you conventionally, and never will. Fancy my writing verses to Miss Bell, as we shall never meet, in all probability, after this hour. What does it matter?" Hermione did not reply. The water seemed to strike her with a certain chill. "Don't you want to see me again?" "Number. My life now is happy and tranquil. If I saw more of you, my fate would, no doubt, be that of so many others. No, Cécile, I do not want to see you again. But perhaps I might care to see you. You will have the best of me in the verses I shall send you." "Oh, hang the verses!" cried Hermione, and turned onto the other side. At the end of 100 yards, she rolled back again. The poet was harmlessly entertaining himself by taking large mouthfuls of water and spouting them into the air. Hermione burst into a ringing laugh. Applebo regarded her with sleepy inquiry. "You look like a Triton, with your cheeks puffed out that way," said she. "Don't talk," replied the poet. "It adds to the effort of breathing. You look rather like a mermaid yourself." Hermione did not answer, and they swam on in silence through the golden August morn. The sensation of cold had passed, and it seemed to the girl that she was of one substance with the sea, of the same essence, the same elemental property, feeling neither warmth nor cold, nor fear, nor fatigue, nor anything that was alien or individual. She found herself a mermaid, at home, and felt that when it pleased her, she could leave the surface to explore mysterious green depths far beneath. He, her companion, was of it too. They were sea-mates, Triton and Nereid, subjects of the great god Poseidon, owing no fealty to any lord of the land, knowing no trammels but the wide boundaries of the ocean, that greater dominion of the world. She looked at Applebo. He appeared to be under the water rather than upon it, and the yellow eyes rose from the swirl of brine to blink at her with comradeship. Hermione wanted to take his hand that they might plunge together to explore unknown depths, never guessing, innocent girl, that she was well on the road to explore depths just as deep and redoubtable. Well offshore, with their sea world all about, a sudden odd vibration smote against their vigorous young bodies, a vibration that suggested a sound felt rather than heard. "Morning colours," said the poet. "That's the gun from the reading room. Look." He flashed from the water an arm of gleaming gold from which sprang diamonds. Hermione turned upon her face to look toward the yacht flotilla. Down from the trucks of the anchored fleet fluttered the nightcaps, little tongues of black, while Pennant and Burgee passed them on their race aloft, and the national ensign, the stars and stripes, unfurled lazily from the taffrails. To their ears came, with sweet faintness, the shrilling of the sheaves as the halyards spun through them, while from a big steam yacht nearly a mile away came the merry whistle of a boatswain's pipe. Hermione looked toward the Daffodil, then at Applebo. "Rotten lack of etiquette," said he, and grinned. "I haven't any bunting." "Why not? Are you a member of no clubs?" "Oh, yes. The New York and the Atlantic. There is bunting below, but I do not fly it, because I am merely a parasite, a pilot fish." Hermione did not answer, for their pace was a smart one, and she had need of breath. Presently she asked, "How about the tide?" "It is running flood out here," said Applebo. "Otherwise I would not have let you swim. We are in the deep channel now, and the tide is helping. I've been gauging our drift on the shore." The thought of the cold fathoms beneath sent no slightest chill through Hermione. She was too much a part of it all, neither was she tired in the least. They were nearly abreast of the yawl, but seaward. Neither had suggested stopping there. Hermione looked at her companion and wondered how far he could tow her if required. Seized by a sudden impulse, she said, "I think that I will rest a little, please." He was close to her in two powerful strokes that sent the water swirling in his wake, as though he had been a porpoise. His eyes gave her a swift, questioning look. "Take my shoulder," he said. "Do you want to go to the yawl?" "No," replied Hermione, and laid her hand on the bare, flashing shoulder offered her. "Paddle a little so as not to get chilled," said Applebo, and started unconcernedly ahead. The tug of the heavy muscles under her hand reminded Hermione of the sensation one gets in laying the palm upon the shoulder of a galloping hunter. There was the same iron contraction, tense and quivering, to be followed by the quick relaxation, the whole evenly spaced and rhythmic as the throb of an engine. It seemed impossible that the splendid human machine could ever tire. For several minutes she clung, resting and reveling also in the sense of being borne onward without effort. But she was not actually fatigued, and presently released her hold. "Rested?" he asked, looking back. "Quite. Good for the rest of the voyage?" "Yes. And if I am not, you are. Why did you never go in for athletics?" "They do not interest me. Games always made me feel like a performing lion." It occurred to Hermione that they must have made him rather look like one also. "Football?" she asked. "I tried it, but I used to get thinking and forget to play. Besides, I do not like to get banged about. That is merely for vanity. If it were to get something I wanted, it would be different." Hermione did not reply. She watched him curiously as he lounged along. Applebo looked back and smiled. His eyes reflected the swirling green. His hair was the color of the golden-brown seaweed and suggested this substance as one sees it trailing from a rock in a clear tideway. He looked more than ever like a Triton, thought the girl. All he needed was a shell trumpet and a trident. She wondered if so pagan a creature could possess the elements of real, human feeling. At least, she confessed a little ruefully, he could arouse them. She herself seemed to be imbued with an unnatural strength. Her long, athletic limbs smote the water with unflagging vigor. More than that, with an exhilaration. Just what might have been the reaction from this physical exertion had she swum the whole course, one cannot say, for the last third was destined to be uncompleted. Applebo's trained ear, buried in the brine, caught the rattle of boatfalls and the whine of sheaves, and he raised his dripping head to stare toward the shark. "Rest," said he to Hermione. "Here comes your gig. They have sighted us. It's just as well. You might have got overtired." "Bother," said Hermione. "Now you will see me catch it from Uncle Chris." She looked in Applebo's face, which was close to hers, and laughed. Then her blue eyes opened very wide. "What's the matter?" she cried. "You look frightened to death." "Do I?" "Put your hand on my shoulder and rest." Hermione thought that his voice had an odd, strained note. She took his shoulder, then looked at him curiously. The poet's face, naturally a little pallid already from the immersion, had suddenly become of a sickly, bleached-out pallor, which suggested the belly of a dead fish. Hermione was seized by a sudden alarm. "Are you tired?" she asked, and loosed her hold of his shoulder. Applebo gave a rather forced laugh. The colour began to return again. Then, just as Hermione expected, he assumed his sleepy, blinking expression. "What was it?" Hermione demanded. "A little cramp in the sole of the foot. It's gone now. Did you never have one?" He reached for her hand and placed it on his shoulder again. "They are very painful, but not dangerous," said he. Their faces were very close, each to the other. Hermione looked at him questioningly. The poet smiled, and something in the flash of the strong, even teeth set Hermione's heart to thumping in the same undisciplined manner that she had previously experienced on the shore. Applebo pushed the wet hair back from his forehead. As Hermione looked at him, his amber eyes seemed to darken. "This is goodbye," he said. "It is your own fault." "No, my misfortune. There are reasons, besides the silly ones I have given you. This is goodbye." Hermione was conscious of a sudden fatigue. It was as though she had been under the effect of a stimulant which was suddenly withdrawn. The chill of the water struck suddenly through her. Applebo saw the light fade from the deep violet eyes, and the sweet mouth droop a little at the corners. "I'm so tired," said Hermione, in a plaintive little voice. He took her free hand and placed it on his other shoulder. Both were slowly treading water, though depending more for buoyancy on their splendid young lungs, trained to the exercise. The boat was coming on rapidly, not over 300 yards away. Their eyes met and clung for an instant. Those of the poet were like aquamarines, but in Hermione's there was a mistiness not of the sea. They faltered, dropped, then raised to his, as if drawn by some subtle force. "Goodbye," said the poet. "Goodbye, and thank you very much for your kindness." She paused, startled at a sudden clear flame, the same amber light that had been in the yellow eyes when Applebo had turned to her after flinging to earth the gamekeeper. "You darling!" cried the deep, throaty voice, and before Hermione knew what was happening, she felt herself drawn closely to him, and a pair of wet, salty lips were crushed for the instant against her own. Her head fell back, her eyes closed, the water swirled about her ears. Then she felt two strong arms supporting her beneath the shoulders, raising her bodily from the jealous grip of the sea. Blindly, she took a stroke or two, then looked dazedly at the poet. You kissed me." "Yes, Cécile. It was only goodbye." Hermione could find nothing to say, but indeed there was no time. Up crashed the gig under the powerful strokes of the crew. Heldstrom's anxious eyes had noted the drooping of the red-coiffed head, and his thunderous, "Pull, you lubbers, pull!" reached the swimmers from a distance. Fortunately, the kiss could not be observed, the two heads having been directly in line during this indiscreet performance. The boat foamed alongside. That's dis!" cried Heldstrom. He leaned over the gunwale and lifted Hermione aboard when she sank down on a thwart, a limp, dejected mermaid gazing mutely at the poet. "Where is your boat?" demanded Heldstrom. "That you mean swimming around in the water mit this fella?" He turned to glare at Applebo, and his jaw dropped. Hermione saw him pass his hand across his eyes in a dazed sort of way. The poet blinked back at him inscrutably, but it struck Hermione that his face was very white, and she wondered if he had the cramp in his foot again. "You was?" "The pilot Vish," said Heldstrom, in an odd, tremulous voice. "I am Mr. Applebo," answered the poet in his silky bass. "The gamekeeper yonder confiscated Miss Bell's boat. He sneaked around and swiped it. You had better get her aboard before she takes a chill." Heldstrom was still staring in the same dazed, bewildered way. "Vera, have I seen you?" he demanded. "Have you seen me?" retorted Applebo. "I don't remember you." Heldstrom seemed to recover himself with an effort. "You coming mit us?" he asked of Applebo. "No, thanks. I am not tired. I will swim to my yawl." "You won't take a cramp?" cried Hermione. "Oh, no, that will not return. Goodbye, and I hope you will be none the worse for your long swim." "Goodbye," said Hermione faintly, and added, with the slightest catch in her voice, "and I'm not Cécile. I'm Hermione." But alas, these words were lost to the pilot fish, whose yellow head was buried with his long, powerful, overhanded stroke.